While it's common for women and people of color to be viewed as full partners in efforts to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not common to have white men viewed in the same way. We'll talk with the leader of an organization that seeks to change that perception and make the connection between safety, diversity, equity, and inclusion on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize the vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Given a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor perceived or experienced by the individual exposed as a threat to them. It should be no surprise that people of different ages and races and genders and sexual identities and socioeconomic status and ability status will have different perceptions, opinions, and experiences in the workplace, regardless to what the intent of the employer might be. It's impossible to create a psychologically healthy and safe culture without focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. As a matter of fact, I'm of the belief that you can't have DEI, BA, all the other, you can't get there unless you're able to identify, to assess, and to mitigate psychosocial hazards. So that conversation has actually been interwoven into the fabric of this podcast. If you've been following along, it's sometimes a little bit more overt than it is at other times, but I really believe there's a connection between the psychosocial hazard environment and how comfortable people feel, particularly when they're different. One of the underlying reasons that this topic is important is the fact that people are different. And I think it's a conversation worth having. So let me be clear. To some people, this is a really tough conversation to have. It's a tough conversation to have, particularly sometimes for folks of color who sometimes just get exhausted by it because they feel sometimes that they're alone. And it's really neat, and this is from my personal experience, really neat to frankly find white men I can have this conversation with, and it's not exhausting. It's actually encouraging and uplifting. And so my guest for this episode is someone who checks a couple of those boxes. He's a safety professional. He understands the connection between safety, DE&I. He's a white guy. So we're in for a treat. So let's go. Let's go. Let's get right into it. So my first question is, who is Wayne Pignolet?
Wayne Pignolet. It's like I was thinking, I know you sent this question to me ahead of time, and I'm like, still, that's like the hardest question. It's like, who am I? I used to joke, I'm just a Buckeye from the state of Ohio, and I grew up on the east side of Cleveland. And admittedly grew up with some privilege in an all-white neighborhood, and my father was a physician, so we had some of the privilege that went with having money and opportunity and education. So, I went to a private high school, and I went to a private college and got an MBA and all that stuff, right? And but lived in Cleveland area for basically 40 years, and then after that realized it was a small world, wanted to go different places, and I had been in international business for years, so I'd seen a lot of the world, and it was kind of fun because I got paid to go cool places and some not cool. But anyways, and that really started to broaden a lot of my horizons about the world and what it takes for this to be a more peaceful place and all that stuff. And yet didn't really know much about a lot of what I just described to you. Only in the last 5 or 6 years of my life would I have even been able to acknowledge that perspective. So, and along the way, I've been in business. I worked for a big company in Cleveland, with built over $1 billion company called Moen, a faucet company. And I worked for small companies, worked for a company that, had 20 employees. I worked for startups. I owned my own business and been through all that goes with owning your own business. And as part of that, actually, what's got me into the safety leadership part of this was that while I owned that business, it was a granite countertop company, I got hurt. And I got hurt for all the reasons people get hurt, which is it wasn't going to happen to me. I'm impervious and indestructible until I wasn't. And so I got pretty significantly hurt, and it really just changed a lot of me. And then when that ended, the granite countertop business ended, I got into safety leadership trainings with a company called Balmer, which is based out of Houston. And a guy named Paul Balmer who created the company and really started spending a lot of time in front of frontline leaders, working with them about how to create cultures of safety. And the premise there was it's about leadership, right? So it wasn't about the mechanical aspects of safety. It was about the leadership aspects of safety, to be clear. And then as a result of doing that, well, it's not always what you know, but who you know. I met a gentleman by the name of Michael Welp, who's one of the founders of White Men as Full Diversity Partners, WMFDP, who we were in a men's group together, to be clear, and we just bonded. And, he started to say, hey, you should come check out what we're doing. And because of this kind of eclectic experience in international business, I was interested. And when I got into the work, and by then I was good at standing in front of people and leading trainings. And so I figured it'd be easy, right? I'll just go learn new curriculum. And I found out really quick that, well, I could learn the curriculum, the part that I had to really come to terms with to be able to stand up in front of people. And it's an ongoing journey. I want to be super clear about this. I'm still learning, but that it's a journey of how do I see the world? My biases. What judgments do I have of somebody because they're part of a group, right? And how does that translate to how do I deal with them, particularly when you get down to the individual level? And so, I've been in that work. I am the head of operations for WMSDP, and we have 25 years of history of working with large organizations around the world. And it started out with just working with a lot of their white male leaders who didn't understand they had a role in creating inclusive environments, and really just saying, first of all, you do. And second of all, there's a lot in it for you. And third, help them get over the resistance, because if I get it wrong, I'm going to get in trouble. Right? And it's obviously, without going into all the details of that, but that was just like helping them. It wasn't about blame or shame or all that. It's like, yeah, folks, there's a lot into it. And look what you're missing.
Right. By
not being able to reach across and we talk about leading across difference, but also sameness and difference and all that, and navigating all of those elements to create teams of people and environments where people feel like you use the word, they feel like they belong.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's what the organizations, and what's happened is, it's really clear to me the overlap between the safety leadership work and the inclusive leadership work. In fact, in retrospect, particularly on the safety side, I don't know how you do it without including and creating environments.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. Tell me, when you hear the term psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you?
It's funny. I had this conversation this morning with Paul Balmer from Balmer Consulting, and one of his big things is operationalizing words. So you ask a question, what does it mean? And, I think there's lots of definitions out there. For me, I think it's one of the best I thought and simplest was it's interaction safety, right? In a very practical way, it's safe enough for me to tell you enough about what's going on with me. And at a minimum, so that we can work together at high levels, right? Now, I may not feel safe enough to talk to you about what's going on at home, but I may be able to tell you that I'm not here today, even though physically I'm here, mentally, emotionally, I'm not really here. Right? Or some version of that. So I think for me, it's just being practical about it is that ability to have interaction with people at, connecting levels, for lack of a better word right now.
Yeah, I have to add that to the list because that's the first time I've heard that one, but it makes a lot of sense. Interaction safety, because there are a lot of interactions, at least in my opinion and observation, that don't occur because it doesn't feel safe. I won't even
Right.
engage. I mean, I just,
Yep.
some of that lack of engagement comes from bias, but some of it actually comes from reality. Because this is what I experience when I do engage. I experience the words, the phrases, the body language, the just the way my heart beats, there's something that I'm feeling in that interaction. And if that interaction doesn't feel safe to me, I probably don't want to keep it up. I want to get out of that one as quickly as I possibly can.
Yeah, of course. Right. And then notice the opposite is, when do you feel like engaging?
Yes.
Right. And that's,
Yes.
and I agree with you. A lot of it is, what is, to the extent that, we pay attention to what is our body telling us about this. Sometimes you can identify that doesn't feel safe because of this, and other times, this doesn't feel like it's safe for me.
Yes. Absolutely. So let's dig a little deeper. You mentioned it briefly. The fact that you were injured at work, and I mean, a lot of us who are in the safety profession, a lot of what drives what we do is the fact that either we or someone that we worked with or were close to was injured at work, sometimes horrifically, sometimes even in a minor way. That kind of gets us thinking that maybe this should be done a little bit differently. So talk a little bit more about how that situation, that incident, started to get you focused more on just workplace safety in general.
Well, to be clear about it, I think it happened the moment, like literally 30 seconds after I got hurt, because the first initials, what happened is I had half a slab of granite fall on me. On a late Friday afternoon. I mean, I won't give you the whole story, but late Friday afternoon, we had to go fix something for a client. I wanted to do it Monday. Client wanted it done. They were having a party, and I'm like, all right, fine. It was like literally just recut one piece and add a 1/4 inch. It was going to take an hour total to do it. So, all right, I'll go do it. And took some shortcuts, even though somebody there said, don't do it. Somebody who reports to me, again, you get into some of this psychological safety. Someone who worked with me, I own the company, and I'm out there and he's on the forklift. To this day, whenever I see him, we talk back that the impact of that event almost is coming up on 20 years, still is there. Right. So anyways, slab fell on me because I took a shortcut, and it fell, and it hurt. Again, as I describe it, it hurt way beyond your body's ability to generate pain, is way above beyond it, the need for it to do that, for you never to want to do it again. In other words, it's like, it hurts so much. Like at half that, I will never do a single thing that will let that happen to me again. I promise. Please don't let it happen again. Right. But, so that was one thing, but then he couldn't get the stone off me, so he had to run in to get help. So I was lying there by myself in incredible pain. And I realized, and I, to this day, will always remember, it's like, I couldn't see my legs. Covered me from my waist down. And I said, I may have done something to me that can't be undone. And that was one of those, the terms, like the moment. And then I freaked out. Like it hurt, but then I freaked out. And so I think that was it. And I realized that not only was that true for me, I had 24 people who worked for me who, while we said the right things, but the truth, when push came to shove, there was a lot of cheating going on about it, a lot of looking the other way, a lot of really, you did what? Kind of, as opposed to reinforcing by saying, no, actually, it didn't worth doing, man. Okay. And I think that was a big part of it. And then the other part of it is, I have always just been by nature interested in leadership. Like I've always read a lot, and I've gravitated to people who I would consider to be good leaders, to learn from them. And I've been blessed with both really good ones and a couple, that I said, yeah, let's not do that. Let's do more, something else. When I worked at Moen, I worked for a guy named Bruce Carbonari, who was only like 4 or 5 years older than me, but was running $1 billion company. He was a good leader. I didn't always like him at the time, right? But he was a really good leader. And, so I think so that the combination of the two for me is that being hurt and being curiosity. So when I was done with that business, then I got interested in doing it. I came across Ballmer Consulting and was able to sign up to go try, and I learned how to get in front of people. And again, 95% of the work I did was with frontline leaders, who were actually leading people. So it was really interesting to be with them, to learn what it was like for them working in whatever organizational system they were in to help do a better job of, so hopefully they didn't have to get hurt or have somebody get hurt for everybody else to get it.
Right. So I want to pull on one of the threads of something that you mentioned. You mentioned that there was someone operating a forklift, you or the owner of the company. So they were not an owner. They were at some level, hierarchically below the owner. And that they actually kind of suggested that wasn't the way to do it.
Uh-huh.
What I mean, could there have been someone who could have gotten you to do it a different way? Do you think?
That's a good question. Yeah, me.
Okay.
To be honest with you, it was literally been a hard week. It was a Friday at 3:00. I had a buddy was coming to pick me up. We were going to go away for the weekend to go do some big bike ride, and my head was already out of the game. All this stuff that kind of set up the tiredness, the not wanting to do it, the shortcut. I had power privilege, right? And he did. He said it to me, Wayne, why don't we just move those other pieces?
Yeah.
And by the way, I joke a little bit about this, but I'm not sure whether that story unique or qualifies me to talk about safety leadership or disqualifies me. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it could go either way.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, there are a lot of folks out there who believe that sometimes that the only way you can learn is through experience. Yeah. I don't. I'm not one of those. I think I heard once you should learn as much as you can from the mistakes of others because you can't live long enough to make them all yourself. Right. So I don't think I need to experience a piece of granite on me to say maybe I don't want to do that. I believe that hurt.
Hopefully till you take that, you remember my story. You'll never do that again.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
All right.
Yeah. And I'm not very good at finish work anyway. I did a little bit of carpentry back in the day, but I was never a finish guy. So share a little bit about at least your belief and perception of safety and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, that whole, conversation we're having in the country right now about that topic. How and why do you think they connect?
Well, one thing that I heard a lot when I was doing the safety work, and again, I didn't have all the pieces in place when I first started doing that. And it's only after I got into doing the inclusion work that I started to have more of the pieces to go, oh, that's what's missing. Because what you would hear a lot, and admittedly often or almost always from white men, was, I just treat everybody the same. I don't see color, gender, and go down the list, right? And okay, fine. And particularly, at the time, particularly people who are older military, right, would come with that. I don't see the difference. I just treat people the same. And I didn't really question it too much. Right. And, but now with as I got this other experience and one of the challenges I think in the safety world is if you put people in harm's way in order to make money, to use it to describe it that way, which a lot of organizations we do, we put people, or I put myself in harm's way in order to earn a paycheck for my family or do all those things, and we do that as companies. When We do that. There's a recognition of you, and obviously OSHA, and if it's in the mining safety and health administration, all those have a vested role in reinforcing this, that you need to do everything you can to keep people safe, right? So it's not like a lot of resources aren't being spent on that, okay? And yet, okay, people are still getting hurt. And you got to ask yourself why, because, and this is one thing in the Ballmer world we were doing a class, is like, you ask a question in the class, so here, who wants to go home alive and well every day? Okay, cool. So there's no problem there about intent here, is there? Okay, how about this? Do you think all your bosses want you to go home? And they want to go home. Okay, how about all the people that you feel responsible for out there? So it's perfect alignment. And then, you can get into is all the information out there that you need to make sure that you prevent injury or fatality from happening. And the reality is, most of the time, or I would argue almost 100% of the time it is, if you do hazard recognition and you do all the things you need to do, you can identify those risks, and you can put probabilities to them and all that stuff, but you can identify those hazards and then the risks associated with them. But it doesn't always happen, or people don't communicate with each other, right? We talked about how they hold back. And so that's the part I'm missing, is like, so why, in spite of the intent, in spite of the fact, if you really do slow down enough to take a look around, why are people still getting hurt? And I believe that it's this part about, and it comes back to the word, the psychological safety. And I think that word is getting used a lot in the safety world for sure. And I've actually been hearing it more and more in the inclusion, or the other word that gets interchanged is, and you use it, is the belonging word. When people feel like they belong, and we could put some definition around what belonging is, or psychological safety, but what's the feeling of that, and what are the behaviors that they then feel they can have? Gets back to this idea of interaction. I've determined it's safe enough to tell you something. An example of that, and we may have talked about this once before, was that there was a study by ProPublica about temp workers. And they looked at they went in and looked at a lot of the injury reports and all that stuff, and did some studies. And I can't remember the exact number, but I think you're 5 times more likely to get hurt if you're a temp worker in the United States than you are if you're full time. And there's reasons for that they identified. One is, you don't know anybody. You're trying to not, the way it works in America and temp workers, you come in one day and you literally get fired at night, even if they're going to have you back the next day. So you're trying to make sure that so at the end of the day, they basically, they don't get a DNR on it, which is do not return. So I'm going to go do a good work. So if the boss looks a little cranky, I have language issues, or my PPE doesn't fit, or any number of the things, I probably am not going to go tell. Then I'm just going to try to figure it out, right? Not to mention, we often give temp workers some of the worst work out there, and we feel less invested in training them to do the work because they're temps, right? But I think that's one example where you're new to something, you don't feel safe, you're trying to get someplace, so you're going to try to figure out, navigate this, as opposed to walking in and say, hey, look, I need to tell you, that doesn't look safe to me, or I don't know how to do that, or this doesn't fit right.
Right. Yeah. Real important point regarding, temp workers. And if I were to scour the population of temp workers, I'm going to guess, I've not done research on this, but I'm going to guess that they would be overwhelmingly women, people of color, poor white men. I'm going to guess that the temp worker population is not full of people with MBAs and, undergraduate degrees and law degrees and doctorate. I'm just guessing that. So again, and it reinforces the statement that you made about exposing people to harm so people can make money. And this is one of those areas I have difficulty with some days, watching organizations that put people at risk knowingly put them at risk and seem to be okay with it as long as someone makes money. That's just not, that doesn't work well for me personally. It doesn't. Because honestly, I believe that the extent to which you can care and take care of that human being, you can probably make more money. Probably make more.
Right. Well, I think you bring up two good points. So I want to hit on the one is like what the makeup or the demographics of, or the diversity at the front line. And so I was just reading a study. I think it was, McKinsey had a study that 70% of the workforce in the U.S. is frontline workers. And that the trend on this is that group is because of, the trend line is for that to become increasingly diverse. Right? And all the issues that come with that. I have different skin color. I'm different gender or different orientation or different levels of experience. I mean, all those levels of, religion, even political views, right? Which, are increasingly, it's easy to say, hey, we don't talk about it at work, but in our current situation, it's one of those things that interferes with people's sense of belonging. But all of those are elements that we know interfere. So if you as a leader, particularly in an environment where you're trying to keep people safe, come in and say, hey, I just treat everybody the same. Particularly if you're a white guy who has this view of the world and you have somebody who doesn't look like you, who's like, yeah, I know how to play that game, but that doesn't mean that's not true for me and you're not really seeing me. So I'm trying to navigate how it is I can be successful in this world. Right? So how can I fit in? And I, as a white guy, look, y'all, just treat everybody the same. And it's not that those well-intended people don't want everybody to come home alive and well. They do. But I think and let's assume good intent, because I think 90% surveys say, right? 90% of the people are either persuadable or true believers. There's about 10% who are detractors who we're probably never going to convince. But all those people who want to do it, you're missing a real opportunity to be more effective as a leader, to make sure people are safe, to get innovate. I mean, the studies are pretty clear and what can happen. So that's, I think, a big thing. It's just a reality is that we are living in more diverse worlds, particularly on the front line. And if you, as a leader, if you can step in and lead across that difference and create belonging and have people feel like this is a place worth being, I think the rewards are huge.
Absolutely agree with you.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
People, it's there's some, can't recall the group who did the study that suggests that your culture, the culture of the organization, particularly if it's toxic, is 10.4 times more responsible for people leaving than what you pay them. And there's another school of thought out there that says if you get into the salary arms race, you're eventually going to lose out to somebody anyway. And so it's really not so much about what people are paid. It is about how they feel in that culture, ultimately. And the safer I feel in that culture, the more belonging in that culture, the more taken care of I feel, the more likely I am to stay and to do good work. Matter of fact, to do great work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think you might be the one I first heard to say, if you don't feel safe, you can't be safe.
Yeah. I do have to give,
Right. And
I have to give
full
credit to Lorraine Martin at the National Safety Council for, but I repeat it a lot because I really believe it. I think it's really important that, as a matter of fact, even if we did, and I think we will someday, in our incident investigation processes, if we searched a little bit further back from the physical thing that comes, so the physical cause we identify, we tend to stop there. Oh, the person, put their foot on the gas instead of the brake. Why did they put their foot on the gas instead of the brake? Why is it that this person that we put through all this training, that's been a great driver the entire time, why is it today that they put their foot on the wrong pedal? Why is that? What was going on for them emotionally at the time? And often, not all the time, but often we're going to find that what was going on in their head was something we could have done something about. We didn't have to give them that extra route. We didn't have to tell them that, if you don't get back in time, you're going to be fired. We didn't have to create that kind of environment. We didn't have to. We decided to. And the net consequence was, some person getting injured, some piece of equipment being destroyed, or badly damaged. Yeah.
Or in fact, there might even been rewards for creating some of that.
Say
culture,
more.
Which is, and again, it's that tension between safety and performance. And there's lots of examples where, call it another form of a microaggression. So let's say, and here's a very simple one. Let's say you set up time on a regular basis. Hey, we're going to have safety meetings. Hey, safety's first, right? Safety's first. And at a corporate level, that may be true. And there might even be pockets in the organization that really do a good job of it. But there's enough other pockets that are like, oh yeah, I know we're supposed to be having a safety meeting here, but that production issue we had out there?
Right.
Let's talk about that. I don't think those messages are missed. Right? You call it a safety meeting, but we're talking about production. And by the way, in the ballroom, it's one of the things we talk about is if you are inconsistent about this, if you say you're going to do thing about safety and then you use it for something else, nobody misses that. Right. And so, so I think it's a big deal. The mess people read between the lines.
I heard once, your actions speak so loud, I can't hear a word you're saying. Because
say about lead by example.
Absolutely. So
right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. I was going to say, and we all know it.
Right. We do.
See a boss not wearing PPE. See somebody, let's take it over into the inclusion part where people feel like they belong. There's a joke told about pick an element of difference. And people laugh and maybe some people kind of, and then you tell that nobody says, hold on a second.
Right.
Hold on a second. That's not cool.
It's like that passage in Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. It's not, the appalling words of the quote unquote bad people, but it's the deathly silence of the good people.
Yeah.
That really is the issue. It really is the issue. Tell me a little bit more about this organization, White Men as Full Partners in Diversity. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah. It's
okay,
White Men as Full Diversity Partners. And the company's been around for 25 years. And it really was started out for us, this, what we call the historical perspective, which is traditionally what happens when you look at some of the elements of diversity or difference, is you have race, gender, orientation, age. I mean, you can keep going down the list, but those generally are amongst the big four, right? That when you get organizations or even individuals like, okay, we need to go do something about it. Where does the focus usually go? On race, where generally speaking, where do we go?
Right.
We go look at people of color. Okay. And by the way, and we know this because we work with a lot of them. If you go look at this chief diversity offers for most Fortune 1000 companies, they don't look like me.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. And I know there's conversation about that, which we don't need to get into now, but that it's often it's like we can outsource this. Okay, we've checked the box, right? Same thing with you when you look at gender. Okay, who do we go talk to? And by the way, the who is majority men is what in our world is like who really. And again, you look around the United States, who's running the organizations? It's still like over 90. I believe it's still over 90% of men are CEOs of the Fortune 500, right? So just predominantly still the majority is men, and particularly white men. So when you go back to race, you're talking about, we often look to people of color to help us do that work. When we talk about gender, we ask women to do it, right? When we talk about age, it's often we look at the young and the old, but the majority doesn't get examined. And our position is that if we, as the majority group, aren't willing to step in and understand we have a role, so we can't put it off onto somebody else. I can't outsource true change. And I actually think I'm a good example of that, because when I stepped into this work, I figured naively, and I'm trying to make it black and white in the sense of that, or binary in the sense that I believe this. I knew that I had work to do on myself to step in a room and be able to talk about inclusion. But I did think that I would just be able to get the curriculum down and the words down and be good at it. And I was really wrong. I had to go through my journey. I had to own my judgments about gender, about race, about all those different things based on who I is, how, whatever perspectives I've had in this world. And so I think that that's a lot about what White Men as Full Diversity Partners is about. First is about some awareness that majority men have a lot to gain, that we need to step in and do the work. We can't just outsource it, right? And even though we may say, yeah, I believe in it, but we need to step in and do it. And we also believe that the real long-term sustainable work comes when we don't get it just here, but we get it here. So we talk about the head and the heart specifically, right? And then we also get into skills and practicing about how do we have conversations that in the past maybe we stayed out of because we didn't know, we were afraid we're going to be wrong, or we get hauled into HR, the organization wouldn't have our backs. And the truth is there's lots of examples where that has happened. Got it wrong, and my buddy over here got in trouble, so I'm just not going to do anything. Right? And so we help encourage courage, if that makes sense.
Encouraging courage. So do you think courage is one of the major components that's missing from the discussion? And are there other things that are missing when we have this whole discussion about the topic?
That's an interesting question about the courage thing. I sometimes think it's another one of those words that we throw around. And I'm aware I do it too. I think the truth is that we just have to decide somebody needs to go decide that they care enough to go do something. And they got to lean in and they got to go learn. And you know what? It's not going to always be fun. And there's not one rule that's always going to work for you. Like, I can make assumptions about how you see the world, and another black man next to you can see it differently. And oh, by the way, it's also true about everybody.
Right.
Right. Okay. But so that's the point. I actually think, is that courage? Is it care? I think it's kind of all those things. I'm willing to step in. I'm willing to I have enough courage to step in, and I may not get this right. Okay. But I think at the end of the day, I have to care enough to be willing to do that. Care about people. Yeah, it's a great question, David. I'm not sure I've ever been asked a question quite like that.
Yeah, you've mentioned this more than once in our conversation about you've mentioned the you may not get it right part. And I think that's important, because there's this, and some of this is actually unfair to people in leadership in general, regardless to what their demographic might be, there's this unfair kind of pressure that systems, and then we put on ourselves in leadership roles, that I have to get everything right. Well, if you have to get everything right, why do you have other people around you? Then, because that's part of the joy of having other folks involved in the conversation, is to help in areas where I know I'm not going to get that right because I don't know that much about it. I don't have a lot of background. Here's my expertise. That's not one of them. So why isn't it okay to not get it right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so here's some other words for us, right?
Yes.
Vulnerability. Okay, as I'm vulnerable, as I don't know. One of the most powerful words I think we could use as leaders, I don't know here. Or I don't know how you might react to somebody else and saying, hey, look, I'd like to, I'm trying to reach out here and I'm not sure how this is going to go. There's a number of ways to do that. I think Brene Brown has really been good about the vulnerability and leading with that and the power of vulnerability. I thought that was just really some good stuff about that. And, I think the other is, other things that are part of it is curiosity. Am I curious? I don't know. I'm going to stop assuming I have the answers. And to be honest with you, this is one of my struggles in the world, just to be vulnerable for me, is I grew up with a dad who was the smartest guy in the room. Bless his soul. And he truly was most of the time, right? But I could never compete with that. So what I got out of it is I was always trying to prove I was right, because I often felt like it, just my little trauma as a little kid, right? And so I grew up for a long time. I'd have people say to me, why do you think you always have to be right? Right? And so that has an impact on people I create relationship with, I work with. And so that's been one of the things that I've continued to have to work. I often get accused on this group of friends I hang out with a lot of saying is I always have to have the last word. So, things like that. So I think vulnerability and curiosity.
You also seem to have just a lot of self-awareness. That comes across in the way you speak anyway, that this, and I honestly, I personally think that's really important, that, life is in general empty and meaningless, and we spend our entire existence trying to make meaning out of things. And the first thing we try to make meaning out of is what's going on in me. Is there really significance to the fact that, I feel a certain way? Well, there is to me. And what's behind that? Why is it that it means something to me? It's just having that almost constant conversation and examination of myself, and then projecting that onto other people. Because I in some cases, I think we have just the opposite, that people, instead of, kind of looking at me and what's going on with me and why I'm feeling this way, I focus on, well, Wayne, what would you feel that way for? And there's something wrong. You shouldn't feel that way. You should feel this way. Well, I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense to suggest that there's something wrong with your feelings. Your feelings just are what they are. What we do with them is, well, how's there something wrong with them? They're yours. They're valid to you. They're important to you. They mean something to you. And how this connects back to safety is often that sixth sense, that sixth hazard that we don't see, is telling us that something is wrong. Something, I don't know exactly what it is, but I don't feel good about this thing. And the system tells us, push through it. No pain, no gain. You bear down, focus, all that type of thing, which is tends to be a really male thing to do. But while we're pushing through it, we're missing hazards that bring risk to us because of our level of vulnerability to that particular hazard. So we miss it. And until it breaks our arm or crushes our legs or, gives us some type of respite, or our soul.
Or our souls. Right. Or, the emotional, because you bring up something, you just, we can probably go down this just for a little bit about, it's this idea of feelings. Right. Okay. And paying attention to that sixth sense and the aspect of that. So for me as a male, and I'll own it as a white male. So, and for you, and I have been in, let me back up. So I joined in 2005, a men's group that, believe it or not, met 4 hours every Wednesday night. It's not religiously affiliated, but it is about, really, if you really want to just have some reflection and build a community of men who both care about themselves and care deeply about you, to kind of call you on the BS that we have and to love you for it. But the big thing that was about us, all the stuff where we have been taught
Yes.
to suck it up,
Yes.
to tough it out, to do action. And, it's really interesting. So this was the biggest thing for me too. Somebody came in, and I was just trying to figure it out. Like literally half of what they talked about, I did. It just
Yes.
literally went over my head.
Yes.
Like I didn't understand because they kept saying,
Yes.
so how are you feeling? And some guy goes, I feel sad. I'd be like, right? And it took a while to realize all those parts of me that I didn't pay attention to. Right? And I think it's that sense. Now the power of it is, the good news, bad news about it is I now feel all those feelings. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel guilty. I feel shame. I feel all of them. Whereas before I could numb them out or whatever. That's the bad news. The good news is I feel them. I feel alive, and I work through them way faster. So that sense about what's going on in the world, I think, is helpful. And then be able to breathe through them. Go, wow, I'm really stressing out. I noticed that. So it's self-care. And I do think, it's getting out of some of that. I got to go get this done. I got to slow down enough. I don't need to be this tough. I need to be vulnerable. I can be vulnerable. I can own that I don't get it right. And I think that that's part of it too, is how do we have, as a leader, how do I slow down and how invite everybody to slow down? Right? Just a little bit. We got work to get done, and that's true. We do have to get work done, but it's the go slow to go fast type thing.
Yeah. I learned a new word, and I may not pronounce it exactly right, but the term is alexithymia. And yeah, it's, I was watching a presentation from a psychiatrist that talks about it's the inability to understand one's own feelings. And because I don't understand my own feelings, I certainly can't describe them to anybody else. And I'm wondering what's going on with you when you talk about feelings, because I don't know what that means for me. Again, that inward focus. And it is, again, according to the person who's speaking, it is really prevalent with men, really prevalent because of some of the things that you talked about. And so it becomes this learned behavior or this lack of awareness of our own feelings. And we transport that, we lay that blanket over other people. Again, because I haven't taken the time to understand how I'm really feeling about this topic, what's really going on with me, the fact that, and the emotion that we do learn about is anger. So that comes out that's the reaction you get from everything. We get
which is the one we can be, as men can be angry.
Absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
So can I ask you a question? When you were a kid and young, what were you taught about your feelings?
Well, in my case, because I was raised by a teenager, a woman, and didn't have any men around, I didn't get as much of that because I got a little bit, you got to grow up, but I wasn't told I couldn't cry. I was just told I was told I got to get tough though, but crying's okay, but you got to be able to do something. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've had a little bit more balance because I didn't have this, I've never met my dad, to be quite honest. And, was, raised around my mom and my aunt, my grandmother, more women around. So again, as I have more birthdays, I count that now a blessing that I had feelings and I cried a lot. I did all the stuff that, they call you all kinds of names for doing that, but that's what I was around.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. But I feel like, I'm able to let that stuff out because I'll go have I'll watch a movie and tear up and stuff like that. I mean, I really kind of feel stuff. And I think it's healthier. I do. Some don't. I just think it's healthier.
I do too.
Yeah. And I think it also helps to, if I feel that, the other person's feeling something. I mean, it's not just about even how they present. Because again, we're in this society that tells us to, particularly men, you got to look the part, And so we put ourselves in really horrible situations that don't feel really good, and we're all just faking it. So I'm here to say, let's just stop that. Let's be honest. This doesn't work really well for any of us. So why don't we try something different? Why not?
Yeah. And I think that's part of, and I think that's part of what, coming back to the inclusion and the safety is like bring them together. It's like, how do we, as a leader, how do really want to help get people make sure they do really truly go home safely? And yes, Absolutely. We have a business to run. Okay. And so that's the key. Is like in an ideal world, we'd all have all the time in the world to keep everybody safe and still get everything or more out of the quota or what it is that day. But as we know,
yes,
we're balancing.
Yes.
Right. And so whatever it is, we're, how do we create environments that people feel like they can fully participate? Okay. And that's what I think I'm intrigued by.
So as we start to wrap up the conversation, I've got two things to ask. The first is, if you had, and I believe you're going to have people who will be listening to this conversation. Most people listen to the podcast. Some people watch, but most people listen. And they're listening and they're going, well, okay, I get all that talk. I think there is a connection between safety and diversity and all that stuff you talked about there, Wayne. But what can I do? What can I do to get started? Give me one or two things I can do, because, I've been kind of trained to be a doer. I practiced at being a doer. What can I do?
Well, here's one thing. And I think there's two levels. One, you could call it systemic issues or organizational issues if you want, if that's easier. And then there's just individual leadership issues, particularly at the point, and it's easy to say it just at the front line, but obviously frontline leaders would take a pretty special frontline leader who could do all we might want them to do in isolation from the organization. In other words, good leadership, good individual leaders need good organizational support, right? So, but I think one of the things is, like, if you are in diversity or HR or whatever, is get the people who are thinking about inclusion at your organization with the people who are thinking about safety. Just practically. And let's say, how do these overlap? And I was at listened to the American Society of Safety Professionals on January 26th, had a whole day, workshop on the overlap between DE&I and safety. And one thing that impressed me was there was a lot of information about why, but not much about the how. So I'm glad you asked, right? So get people together is, look, it makes sense. We get that it makes sense. You can see the overlap, but what are we going to do? And have those people, have those two groups start to talk to each other. And we have an example of some clients who are doing that now. And it's really cool, right? To watch them do that. And then I think the other part is, once you do that and all the, there's just other organizational issues that come up with about accountability and training and all that stuff that I think most people understand that. And the safety, in order to create a safety culture, a lot of the work is already being done to do that in organizations. Okay. That's a good news here, because some of you start to layer on top of that some of the skills a leader needs. And I'm going to use the word skills. The skills, mindsets, and all that stuff in heart comes with it. But the skills they need, there's a lot of overlap between how to, for example, if you see somebody tell an off-color joke about, you pick, right? Isn't the skill set to step in and say, hey, hold on a second, and let's have a conversation about what just happened and go through the consequences and the impact of all that and how the behavior really needs to be here, aren't necessarily all that much different than the skill set you would have if you saw somebody not wearing their PPE. Right. We teach this thing called a stump speech, which is you can get up there and talk about why safety is most important, or talk about how somebody got hurt or killed, or you got hurt or killed, and there's some pretty powerful stuff, right? Also, what is your stump speech about why it's so important to make sure people feel like they belong? What are the words you as a individual leader use to say, hey, everybody, I just want to remind you what we're really trying to do here. We're trying to make sure everybody comes home alive and well, and making sure everybody here feels like you have your voice. And let me tell you why it's important, right? And you can do it in a minute, 30 seconds.
Wow.
And I've seen good leaders who they have one of these quote unquote stump speeches, who they use it well enough that they can start it and some other people can finish it for them. Right. So I think there's both, David. It's like, how do you start to get these groups up here? And then I think individual leaders, what are specific things to take that layering that's already there in a lot of the leadership stuff and bring in the inclusion and open people's awareness and give them even additional skill sets to do that work.
Wow. Okay. That was an hors d'oeuvre. So let's say there's folks out there who want to get the full meal. They get it. They understand what you just talked about, but they think, look, we'd love to have, somebody like Wayne come and help us, or we want to learn a little bit more about that. How can folks find and reach out to you and get a little bit more information about the kinds of work that you do?
I'd love that. It'd be fun. I can get my email address is Wayne, WAYNE dot, and then my last name, here's the one, Pignolet, PIGNOLET at WMFDP.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, all that stuff. But that's really the email's probably the best.
Well, I'm really hopeful. I'm hopeful. That's what kind of keeps me doing these podcast episodes and having conversations with folks like yourself. I think we're moving in the right direction. I do. I think the conversations are important. I think the diversity of perspectives about this topic are very important. People wonder, why do you have all these different kinds? Because psychological health and safety is everywhere all the time, anytime there are human beings involved. It just is. Right. And if, as you so aptly described, if we can take some of the things that we've learned about how to address physical safety hazards and apply them to this one, oh my goodness. I mean, I think a lot of things would get better, and again, one thing I'll share to those folks you're looking for, some tools is, I have what I call a psychosocial hazard inventory. It's a very simple tool that we use and it doesn't focus on people, it focuses on the environment. Because as you said again earlier, a lot of this is about the environment. You hire good people. You hire people who want to get things done, who do have the best interests of the customer and best interests of their colleagues at heart. But the environment itself is where the work needs to be done. And if we work on that environment and then put good people into that environment, I think we've got some success.
Yeah. I would just put an exclamation on that. And I say, I think, and creating that environment is still an organizational leader's challenge. Both the safety part and the belonging part, that's leaders' challenges, both individually and collectively.
Sure.
Is to go do that. It's like, how do we as leaders, and that's incredibly, this is my belief system. I don't know of a single more powerful force than leadership in order to change something.
Well, thanks, Wayne, very much for the conversation, and to those of you who have been again listening, we appreciate you taking time out to hang out with us for this little period of time. So, if you're watching on YouTube, please do push the subscribe button and the like button. We love those. If you're following on wherever you get your podcast, happy to have you stop in with us. We have a new episode every single week. You can certainly follow us on our webpage, psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn as well. And we're going to look forward to hearing from you soon. Please do reach out if you have questions, concerns, want to get a hold of our guests. We're happy to make those connections. And Wayne, we appreciate you spending some time with us, and we'll look forward to our next opportunity to get together and chat. So that concludes this episode. We'll see you next time on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com. WMFDP.com.